Welcome back, CSE 103, Intro to Computing, to Part 2 of our Exercise 17 EC Extra Credit using our SpongeBob random characters and using some JavaScript and a random number to generate random SpongeBob characters. So it's kind of an extension of the Show Hide Patrick exercise that we did, except now instead of just Patrick, we have random characters displaying. So still a very simple exercise, but just something to introduce you to JavaScript. And that's what we're doing next. And we have more variables and more lists and functions happening, and that's what we're going to do now. So I'm going to go back here, and remember we're working in our script.js file, and you could just close this up if it's taking up space. And one other list we're going to make right now is, I'm just going to copy this just so I can do a little less typing, and I should put a semicolon here. So after every statement you should put a semicolon, and I'll just put an extra space, and I'll paste the list again. And this one I'll just call it full names. And I think in the earlier notes I called it names, but I'll call it full names just so you know what it is. And I'll adjust these names. And one thing to point out, with variables do not have quotes. They're not strings. They're not text. They're variables. So they don't have them here. They don't have them here. But we're going to use strings here, so we will have to put quotes around these, but I'll show you that you can do it later. You don't have to do it right away. So I'm going to put full names here, SpongeBob, and you can put spaces in here, SquarePants, and don't worry about quotes yet. And you don't have to worry about the spaces either between the commas. Patrick Star, this way you could learn about their names. And then we have Squidward, and his last name is Fancyson. And then we have Sandy, and her last name is Cheeks. And then you could say Mr. Krabs, or you could say Eugene Krabs. I'll use Eugene in case you didn't know that his first name was Eugene. And then we'll have Larry Lobster, and I guess that's his name. We don't need spaces in between the commas, but what we do need is quotes around these. And an easy way to do that, you could just highlight this and do Shift Quote, and it'll wrap both quotes around it. And instead of doing one at a time, you can actually do this. You can highlight Patrick Star and then hold your Control key on Windows or your Command key on Mac and highlight again. And highlight this, and make sure you're not highlighting the commas. And I'm highlighting that one, and I'm still holding down on my Command key, and on Windows you'd hold down your Control key. And now that all 5 of them are highlighted, I could do Shift Quote, and they'll all have quotes around them. And I'll put my semicolon at the end, and now I have my list of 5 full names separated by commas. I have my list of 5 images, and actually this is a list of 5 variable names which represent images. And that's all I need so far. Eventually we're going to put a list of colors, but we're going to make sure this works first before we worry about colors. Now, what I want to show you first is just something where we're going to make a random number. So we have to have a random number of 0 through 5. And in Python, that's really easy to do, to make a random number. JavaScript, it's a little bit more work, and I just want to show you something when I do this. And I'm just going to move this over a little bit, and I'm just going to make a variable. So I'll do var again, the keyword var. And for random number, I'll just give it a name called rn. That means random number. And it equals, and we're going to use a method called math.random. And I'm going to start typing math. You can see it's coming up here. And notice it has a capital M, math dot, and I'll type R, and you'll see random come up. And you are going to put parentheses after this, but we're going to leave them empty for now. And I would put a semicolon at the end. So that's going to make a random number. And I just want to point out something, and I'll do this. I'll put 2 spaces. And I'm going to do something called console log, or console log, because we're going to show this in the console. And console.log, this is like printing in Python. So we're just going to print something out down here, and it's only just to show you how this works. So I'm going to print out the rn, the random number. So the random number that we're generating here with math.random, I just want to show you what happens. And I'll go down here, and I'll just hit run. And there it is, 0.33, 0.28, 0.17, 0.09, 0.746. And it never gets to 1, and it never quite is at 0, 0, 0. So it's kind of going from 0 to 0.9999. Now, we don't want a random number like that. We actually want to multiply it by 6, so it kind of goes up to the range that we want. So we're going to do something next by going rn. We'll kind of redefine it. We'll say rn equals, because we're taking the same variable, and we're saying, okay, this time rn is going to equal Rn itself times 6, because we know we need 6 numbers generated. And I'll hit run. And now 5.02, 2.3, and you can see what's coming at 1.6. And I think it might do a 0 something, 1.9. I think it will go under. Yeah, there's 0.3. What we want to do is we just want to round down these numbers. So they'll never quite go to 6, and because of that, if we get rid of the decimal, we'll round them down to 0 to 5. So we use something called math.floor. Think ceiling kind of raises it up, floor takes it down. So we're going to do, again, we'll reassign it and say Rn equals, and we'll use math. There's math dot, and then I'll put F, L, and then floor will come up, and then you put the number in there. So there's floor, and then the number you put in there is going to be Rn. So it's going to take the floor of itself. So it's going to round down its number is what's going to happen here. I'll put a semicolon again. So we have 3 lines here, and this console log is just making it show up over here. We're going to get rid of it. It's just to test it. Now, when I hit run, you see we get 2, 4, 4, 3, 2, and you can keep testing, 5. It won't go to 6, and it will go down to 0. So that will generate 0 through 5. So this is our random number 0 through 5. So that's working, and I just wanted to show you how that works. It seems like a lot of work. Python, it's not that much work. So I'm going to get rid of this. I don't need it. It's working. That's only to display it in the console, which we don't need. So now I can move this over because I don't need that as much. I could bring this out. I don't think it'll break things too bad. And we're going to put this inside a function because every time the function runs, every time we click a button, we want a new random number. We don't want a random number generated and then a function running, because then it'll use the same random number each time, every time the function runs. We want a new one generated. So this will be inside the function. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put function, and I'll just call the function name show image, and I'll put my parentheses, and I'll put my curly braces, and I'll tab this over, and I'll tab this over, and now I need my final curly brace, so don't forget about that. I'll put my curly brace here, and it knows to go over to the margin, and I'll just kind of move it down a little. So this is the first part of the function. Remember, here's the function keyword, the function name. We're not using any arguments. We have our opening curly brace, our closing curly brace. We don't need a semicolon after the curly brace, but we are going to have a function call. But this is the first part of our function. We're generating a random number, and then we're going to use it. So what we're going to do here is, first of all, if you remember this from last time, we're going to do document dot, and then we're going to do get element, and if you just start typing it, we'll do get element by ID, and in parentheses we'll put the ID. Now the first ID we want is pick. We're going to put something in here. We're going to use the pick ID because that's where our image source is going to go. So we're going to write HTML in here. So going back to JavaScript JS, we're going to use pick, and you have to put it in quotes. So there's pick, and what are we going to do? We're going to write HTML. So we're going to do dot inner HTML. And if you just start typing it, it'll come up. And then we could just put equal. And what's the HTML going to be? Well, it's going to be this. It's going to be one of these. Now, which one is it going to be? Well, let's try one and just see what happens. Let's try, we'll use Patrick. And Patrick is actually index position 1. Because remember, this is 0, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's index position 1. So I'm just going to put Patrick. And I'll put a semicolon. And I don't need a quote around Patrick because he's a variable name. And then what I'll do is I'll copy this whole thing and I'll paste it. And this time I'll put name in here. Because remember, we have an ID called name. Our H2 has an ID of name. So we're going to use name here. And then that inner HTML, it's not going to be Patrick. That inner HTML is just going to be the name. And that's why I put all the names here first, because we're going to pick one out of here, and it's actually going to be, and I'll show you right away how to do this. You could type Patrick Star here if you want. Like, you could put Patrick Star. You could do that. And here we're using the variable. Here we're actually putting the text. But we're going to pull it from a list. But I just want to show you that this should work. So right now, we're going to generate a random number, which we're not using yet. And we're going to put this thing on a page. Now, before I do anything, and this won't affect anything, I have to call my function. Because nothing's going to happen right now. I'm not calling my function. I'm going to call my function, and I'm going to do document dot get element by ID, same way. And the ID I'm going to use is going to be the button. So this time I want to contact the button, and the button ID name is BTN. So I'm going to use that. And that's going to be in quotes, BTN. And then this time we're not going to use inner HTML, we're going to use .addEventListener, add, and that's going to tell the button to listen for an event, and the event it's going to listen to is going to be a click event. You could see click somewhere here, usually in here, there's click, so it's going to look like that. In quotes, it's going to be click, and then you will use a comma, and you'll put the function name, show image. And there it is. You click on it there, and notice it doesn't use that. So you're not going to use the parentheses. It's just going to do that, but make sure you have your closing parentheses like that. So that's what your event listener is going to look like. This is your function call. Document get element by ID button add event listener click show image. So this should work. Everything looks like it should work, and let's try it out. You can hit run here, which is just going to show it there. But we'll go here and we'll refresh it and display image, and there's Patrick. Now, if I keep hitting the button, it's going to keep showing Patrick because we didn't put any random number in there. But at least it's working. So we know it's working. So let's just edit this stuff. We have Patrick in there, and we have Patrick star. We don't want either of those. What we actually want is we want the list, and then we want the index number. So let's just try it with the list name and index number. So if we wanted Patrick up here, we could say images, and in square brackets, we can put 1, because that's who Patrick is. And same thing here. We could put full names, and make sure you spell it right or it won't work. And then in brackets, we're going to put 1. What this will put as inner HTML in the pick ID, it'll put the variable images, which is a list, and it'll put the one index position, which is Patrick. So it'll put the Patrick image. And I mean, just to try it out as something different, let's put 2 here. Let's put 2, and let's put 2. That should go to 0, 1, 2, which should display Squidward. So with images 2, it should display Squidward because Squidward is index position 2. Remember, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'll keep doing that. And that's the way the names are too. So 0, 1, 2, so it should show Squidward Fancyson. So it should show Squidward when I do it. So now we're doing that with an index number. So I'll refresh it, and I'll display it, and there's Squidward Fancyson. Now, that's not random, that's just showing Squidward. If we want it random, what number do we put in there? Well, instead of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we use random number, because this should be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. So instead of the 2 in there, we're going to use Rn, because remember, Rn is a variable that represents the random number 0 through 5. And then same thing here, we'll use Rn here, and it should use the same one. Because once this random number is generated, it's going to plug it in here. So if it comes up with a 3, it's going to put 3 here and 3 here. And let's see what happens. Refresh it and try it out. There it is. It's got the names correct, and they're loading, so everything looks good. So that's the way it works. The last thing we could do here, and it's not a big deal. If you skip it, you skip it. I'll still give you credit, but it's more fun with colored names, and it'll also kind of reinforce things a little bit. If we wanted to put a color and change the color of the names, we could just do another statement inside the function. We don't have to make a new function or anything. Another statement inside the function, and it's going to target name, and this time it's going to be style dot, remember we did opacity with Patrick, but we're going to do style dot color, and there's color, it's a CSS property, and we're going to put equals, and let's just put red for now. Let's say we did them red. What would happen if we did this, if we refreshed it, and if we displayed image, it would display the red color every time. But that's not random, but it just changed the color. We could have done that with the CSS. That wouldn't have really mattered. But instead of red, we're going to use that random number again. Now, what we don't have is a list of colors. So we would need a list of colors. Now, it's a little extra work. We'll put var colors, keep it simple, equals, and we'll make a list. And we'll do some colors, and we'll try to match up the colors with the characters. So for SpongeBob, we'll put gold. And again, if you're not sure of colors, you could look up HTML color names it should come up. W3 School should be right near the top. You could look at colors and say, oh, I want SpongeBob to be, I don't know, dark goldenrod. They have a gold too, which is fine. I think they have a gold as well, so how about goldenrod? I'll try, gold's a little light. I'll try goldenrod. So I'll put goldenrod, comma, and then Patrick could be coral. I think I tried it already and I used coral. I tried pink first, but coral looks better. I'll use coral. And then, now I'm putting spaces in here and that's fine. And then Squidward, I think I used kind of a dark slate gray. That's kind of a Squidward color, dark slate gray. You could copy the name right from the page if you think you're going to mess it up. You can type gray both ways with an E or an A. And there's dark slate gray. And if it ever doesn't show up, if you ever spell the name wrong, it'll just make it black. It'll just go back to default. So if your color, one of your colors is coming up black and you're like, why isn't it that color? You probably spelled it wrong. And you don't have to put the capital letters in here. Even though they have the capital letters here, you don't have to put them. Next I have, there's 0, 1, 2. Now the third one, 0, 1, 2, 3 is Sandy. And that's some kind of brown color. I'll use dim gray. I think I'll use dim gray. I'll use dim gray for Sandy, and I think I'll use crimson for Mr. Krabs, and make sure you spell it right. And I had something else, fire brick, I used for Larry. And you could just use red or whatever. You know, red looks good. Actually, red looks good with Larry. So I guess we could just use red for Larry. Now, these are not variables, so they have to have quotes. So double click, hold Command or Control. Double click again. I'm holding Command on Windows, hold Control, and that way I have all names highlighted. Then I could just do Shift quote, and it'll put quotes around them. So these need to be strings. The color names need to be strings, so they can't be variables. They're not variables, so they have to have quotes around them. These are strings, these are strings. And now what we're going to do in here for color, what is the color going to equal? It's going to be just like the other one. It's going to be the same thing. It's going to be colors. And then in the square brackets, which indicates the index position, is just going to be RN. So that way it's going to use the same random number. That's why we did these all in the same order. So if it comes up with 0, it's going to use SpongeBob, SpongeBob SquarePants, and Goldenrod. And remember, there's no spaces in these names. And that should work okay. As long as you have everything spelled right. I'll even put a semicolon at the end. Check for little things. If you get an error, it'll tell you what line it's on, and you'll just have to see that you know, if you, I mean, anything. You could have a small h in here, and it's not going to work. So you got to watch for these things. You got to make sure that these are exactly like the names of the variables. If you put full name and it's full names, it's not going to work. So before you email me and say this isn't working, make sure you check for any spelling errors. If it tells you something's wrong on line 19, look through it. Make sure everything is spelled correctly. Make sure there's a capital B, a capital I, a capital HTML. Make sure images is spelled right. Sometimes you could do something like that and you don't even know it. But make sure you have everything right, or else you'll get errors. Now, I could hit run here. I don't have to hit run, but I'll go here and I'll refresh it. And now what this should do is it should run the function. And there's Squidward Fancyson. There's Patrick. Now, if it keeps going, that could be the same number coming up. There's only 5 numbers. You could do it a number of times in a row. It's not always going to, there's only 5. We don't have 10 or 20. So it's doing Squidward a couple times there, so that's random, so you don't know what it's going to do. And that's it. Now you could certainly do more CSS and change colors, and you could do a reset button. I think in the past we put like a reset button so it makes the stuff go away again. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff you could do as you get more into JavaScript, but as an extra credit assignment, that's probably good for now. So I'm gonna stop there, and I think I'll just put it as a non-graded assignment. You could just put complete, and I'll check in your Replit account, and I'll see your repels, and I'll see that you did it. Because if you've done all the other assignments, obviously if you're doing extra credit, you probably did the other ones too. And remember, this could keep you from having to do a final exam or something else if you don't feel like doing something else, or make up for something that you didn't do earlier in the semester. So that's our extra credit assignment. It should look like this when you're done. And again, just to review, this is your index. You're not going to have anything in here. You're not going to have anything in the H2. You are going to have display image here, and it's going to write that to the page. It's going to be dynamic HTML that's going to get written to the page once the page gets generated. So when the page loads, it doesn't have that HTML, but then it changes. JavaScript is dynamic, and it could write new HTML to the page. And Our styles is just real basic, and our script is where all the action's happening. And this won't work as long as you're not linking to this and it's already linking to that. So not a lot of code here. We just have these variables that we had to make sure we get right. And again, that's something too. If there's any problem with it, something not showing up, or it's undefined, make sure these things are right. Make sure you have the quotes right and the brackets and all that kind of stuff has to be right first. That's why I did it on the regular page first. And remember, variables do not get quotes, and these things are strings, so they get quotes. Even the HTML code gets strings around them. They get quotes around them, which means they're strings, so they get plugged in as text. So when they run to the page, it doesn't put a quote around them, it actually just puts the HTML in there as if it's text. So that's part 2. That's the end of our exercise 17 extra credit, SpongeBob Random. Hope you enjoyed working on that one.